Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We are getting into my post-spring top 25. We just did 25 through 11, but now it's time for the top 10. And I think this is a little bit tough to order, but I like this list, to be totally honest with you. I'm going to start with Missouri. This is a team that has a lot going for them. Obviously, a ton of momentum coming off a year that was probably one of the best years in Missouri football history, if I'm recalling correctly. But Eli Drinkwitz and the Tigers are fully ready to continue what they started in 2023, having Luther Burden, who I consider the best wide receiver and one of the best skill position players in the entire country. I think he does win the Biletnikoff at the end of the year, but we'll get to that later in the offseason. You also have guys like Mookie Cooper and Theo Weiss to kind of fill in the gaps in that pass game. Brady Cook is fully ready to go as one of the best quarterbacks, not only in the SEC, but in the entire country. The defense is a little bit of a worry for me. You lose someone like Blake Baker as the defensive coordinator, it's going to take a blow. You did bring in Corey Booten from South Alabama, who did an incredible job with that defense, learned under Kane Womack, so we'll kind of have that same type of energy, a lot of downhill, a lot of aggression from this defense coming down the road, which was kind of the way they played the last couple of years. But also losing guys like Tyron Hooper, Darius Robinson, Chris Abrams-Drain, Enos Rakestraw, all of those guys played massive parts in this team, and replacing those are not going to be easy. Now, they've set up a good infrastructure at Mizzou and have been recruiting at a really high level, so I'm sure they have guys that are ready to step up and into those positions, but definitely a huge opportunity for them to establish themselves, not only, for this couple of years, but going on in the next couple of years into the new SEC. Is a huge year for Missouri. I think they're fully ready to build off that momentum, but definitely a lot more pressure there than there was, 3 years ago or even a year ago, to be totally honest with you. And then let's get to Penn State. This is a team that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on, I've found. Drew Aller does need to take that next step if they're going to do what they want to do. I think that's period, end of story. That's no question. Andy Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas as the offensive coordinator, I think will help that a lot. We'll see how much that helps that, because he definitely does need to take a pretty marketable step. They did add Julian Fleming as a wide receiver from Ohio State, but did lose Keandre Lambert-Smith to Auburn. So a little bit of a give and take there. I would rather have Julian Fleming than Keandre Lambert-Smith, but also you need guys like Caden Saunders, Harrison Wallace to step up more and more into bigger roles, because losing someone like Keandre Lambert-Smith just makes that wide receiver room a little bit more of a question mark than it already was, which was already a pretty big one, to be totally fair. This defense is going to be good. I have very little doubt in that. I think they're going to be one of the better in the entire country. You have someone like Abdul Carter on the field, things tend to go pretty well for you. There's no doubt about that. I think he's someone that can straight up just win a game for them. They know that all too well, with JT Tuimoloau coming into them and absolutely just dismantling Penn State in 2022. I think that's something you might just see from Abdul Carter this upcoming year. Obviously, the biggest thing here is the coordinators, Tom Allen at DC and Andy Kotelnicki at offensive coordinator. They both have to hit. There's no two ways about that. But if they do, this team has tons of talent. James Franklin is a good head coach that can keep everyone in the same direction and keep everyone motivated. They have dudes. They just need them to step up into bigger roles. So definitely walking a little bit of a tightrope, but there's definitely tons of ability there. And if Penn State can particularly get the most out of Drew Aller, this becomes very, very interesting for the Nittany Lions very quickly. But then you have Notre Dame at 8 for me. Riley Leonard not being healthy throughout spring camp kind of makes it a little bit tougher to get a good beat on Notre Dame. But I know the defense is going to be absolutely nasty. You have Xavier Watts on the back end, one of the best safeties in college football. Riley Mills is ready to take that next step at the defensive tackle position. Benjamin Morrison is one of the best top nickel backs in the country. So there's skill and ability and force all over this defense. They're going to be playing really, really fast, playing with a lot of energy, and I think it's going to be one of those things where Riley Leonard is not going to be asked to do a ton for them to win games. It's kind of the same thing he did at Duke, where sometimes he had to get a little bit more dirty and take over games a little bit more aggressively. Now with some of the talent around him, especially at the running back position and the O-line, I think it gives him a little bit more of a leash. The wide receiver room is a little bit of a question mark. You do have Mitchell Evans at tight end, which helps that a little bit. Definitely some guys coming in. Chris Mitchell is a fantastic player from FIU. I think Jaden Greathouse is going to be a fantastic player for them. So I tend to believe they'll be okay at wide receiver, but it is still a question mark going in right now who that guy is going to be and then who's going to follow him up. And then you have Utah at 7. This is a team that I have gotten higher and higher on as the spring went on. I think this team has the ability to do some really remarkable things this year, but it's all tied to Cam Rising's health, as it has been for the past couple of years for Utah. He is the entirety of that team when it comes to win total. If he's on the field, you have a very high win total. If he's not on the field, that slowly starts to drop week over week. Dorian Singer coming in from USC at the wide receiver position is huge. It feels like him and Cam Rising have a very good rapport at this point. You also have Money Parks in that wide receiver room. Brant Kuthi is one of the best tight ends in the country. The defense led by Teo Johnson is going to be really, really talented. So as long as you keep Cam Rising on the field, as long as you have him upright and healthy, you have a team that can win the Big 12 and not only do that, but be a team that gets a bye in the playoff, play a team that it's going to be a tough matchup, whether it's between, someone like Texas or Ole Miss or any team from one of those big time conferences is probably the one you're going to draw. But this team has the ability to compete with all those teams because of what they do on the defensive side of the ball and because of what Kyle Whittingham has built over there. So Utah is going to be fascinating to watch. As long as Cam Rising is on the field, they are the team to beat in the Big 12. But then let's move on to Ole Miss. This is a team that I think everyone is kind of, pushing that, they're going to win the SEC and they're going to go to the playoff and they're going to do X, Y, and Z. I think they're walking a little bit tighter of a tightrope than people realize. Not to say that they didn't do an incredible job of building out this team, and when you have someone like Jackson Dart leading the way as a third-year starter, a lot of that becomes a little bit easier. You have Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, and Caden Prieskorn in that pass game that are just going to be incredible this upcoming year, so it's a really embarrassment of riches when you come to those skill positions for Lane Kiffin. But the reality is when you bring in so many portal players, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which we'll get to here in a second, you're definitely walking a little bit of a tightrope. You have Walter Nolan, you have Princely Umanmielen, Chris Paul Jr., Cam Alexander, Trey Amos, among others. There are plenty more on that defensive side of the ball that are going to be absolutely defining for them. Now, if they can put it together and have a really, really good defense, which it's a little bit easier when you have guys that are a little bit more ingrained and have a little bit more great football behind them than, some other portal classes out there. But at the end of the day, they are going to need those guys to hit. If they do hit, a national championship is absolutely on the table for this Ole Miss team. I just think it's a little bit more of a tightrope walk than some people might give it credit for. But then to the top 5, I do have Alabama as number 5. I think this is a team that a lot of people want to write off, right? You want the big bad bully of Nick Saban to be gone, but this team is going to be good. Jalen Milroe, I think, will take that next step forward. Kalen DeBoer will help with that a ton. He is starting to make those NFL-level passes that we didn't necessarily see a year ago. The O-line and run game is going to be among the best in the country, especially on the interior, with guys like Jaden Roberts and Tyler Booker, both incredibly talented guards. And then Parker Brailsford, who just has to get to practice, has missed a lot of that spring practice, but seems like he will be on campus and likely be the starter at center there. And then you have defense leading by guys, Malachi Moore, Deontay Lawson, Jahad Campbell, among others. I think they'll be more than fine. The back end is a big question mark, but tons of big-time transfers that have come in that have helped that a lot. Then you look at Oregon at number 4. This team is absolutely loaded. They are out of this world good. And one of the big questions I had going into this offseason was, what does the interior defensive line look like going into next year? They got Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon, so I'm not necessarily worried about that. Jamari Caldwell coming over from Houston, Derek Harmon coming over from Michigan State, both just remarkably talented guys, and now puts everything in order, where you have the 2s where they should be, and you have the 1s up top where they should be, and just it all makes a little bit more sense in that defensive line room right now up in Eugene. Obviously, replacing Bo Nix is tough, but you got Dylan Gabriel in the portal, and then you added Dante Moore on just for good measure. So I think that's more than fine. I think the quarterback position this year actually is probably in a better position than it was a year ago, at least from a grand perspective. The O-line is going to be really good. The defense is relying on some big-time transfers to hit at different positions, Kobe Savage being one of the big-time ones. But at the end of the day, they should be more than ready to go. A lot of those transfer portal guys are guys that have, all Big 12 or all SEC or whatever behind their name. So no worries there, I don't think. They can walk into the Big 12 and just kick down the door and take over pretty much from year one. It'll be fascinating to watch if they can pull that off. Then we get to the top three, and I start off with Texas here. The team lost a ton of wide receivers, and that was the big worry going into the offseason, but when you replace them with Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, and Matthew Golden, I think you're going to be okay. All experienced, productive receivers. And then you have Quinn Ewers pressing the buttons in year three. It's going to be a thing of beauty. There's so many guys that can hurt you on this team. I didn't even get to guys like Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore and Ryan Niblett that absolutely will be a part of this team. You have Gunnar Helm in the tight end room, and then Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter in the backfield behind a elite O-line, maybe the second best O-line in the country behind LSU. So it's going to be an awesome team. The interior defensive line will be talked about a lot, but when you add someone like Jermaine Lole and Bill Norton in the portal, I don't think they're worrying too much over there in Austin. The back end is a little bit of a work in progress, but I think they'll be more than fine. I think they have enough dudes to fill the roles. Adding Javion Cole was absolutely huge, but I think they'll be ready to go and kind of are in the same position that Oregon is in, where you can walk into a really tough conference and take over from year one. And then the top two, where pretty much everyone has them. Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, or Georgia at 1, excuse me. Ohio State, the only roster that rivals Georgia in the entire country. Frankly, there's an argument to be made that it is a better roster than Georgia's. Will Howard has everything that Kyle McCord didn't a year ago. He is accurate. He is consistent. He is going to do the things that you need him to do. Him running the ball is going to be huge for this team. I think he's going to be able to execute at a really, really high level. They're going to have a great rushing attack with those two running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the backfield. The defense has some big-time transfers coming in, Caleb Downs the main among them, but also more returners that are just absolutely huge. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, someone we talked about earlier in the show, are going to be incredible. They're going to make it impossible for some QBs pretty much all year. And then you have Georgia up top at number 1. This team is absolutely insane. Truly just out of this world. One of the things that everyone could hang their hat on when you played UGA was if you can take Brock Bowers out of the game, if you can take Ladd McConkey out of the game, you have a shot to stop this offense. That's not going to be the case in 2024. They have about 7 guys in that wide receiver room that can make plays. Put that alongside the tight end room that's one of the best in the country, in my opinion. A running back room that's among the best in the country. O-line among the best in the country. The same thing that we've heard with around UGA for quite some time. The back end of that defense and maybe interior defensive line, although if Kirby's not worried about that, then I'm not worried about that, frankly. But the back end of that defense does have some question marks, but Daniel Harris, I think, is going to be a great player for them. I think Ellis Robinson Jr. is going to step up in his freshman year, so I think they'll be more than fine, especially with that elite coaching they have. Some of those problems will be fixed, no problem. So it's going to be wild. I think this top 25 is one of the harder things that I had to put together, to be totally honest with you, because ordering these teams, especially when you're so far from seeing them played, is a little bit tough. But I felt pretty good about that. I'm sure there will be people in the comments that don't feel quite as good about that. But at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty good list, and it'll be fascinating to watch how this kind of adapts throughout the year. But we're going to take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the QB battles around the country. There are still 4 in particular that I want to zero in on. There will be a couple more down the road, I think, but I want to zero in on 4 with USC, Ohio State, Washington, and Nebraska. So we'll get back right after this and talk all about that, so stick with us.